The scene is very oriental. In Britain, it might have been, I'm really frightfully grateful. Here, he prostrates himself at his feet and cries with a loud voice. Everything in Technicolor. Gratitude. This week, it hit me out of the blue, the real meaning of gratitude. It was in a specific context. First of all, I'll start with a shock which happened shortly after I had been with you on Wednesday for the Feast of the Assumption. I had promised to take a lassie who was slightly handicapped to her brother, who had been good to her, to stay with him for a while, and it meant a trip up to Westmeath. I left her with her brother, and as they drove off, I waved them goodbye. It wasn't long before I discovered, through a text from that same lassie, that he had driven into eternity that night. He was 27. Somewhere between 10 o'clock at night and 20 past 11, he had somehow gone into a ditch and been catapulted into the field. And by the time he'd been found and taken to hospital, he was dead. I could hardly believe it. It's what they call denial. And yet it was true. And many things crossed my mind as I digested that text. What did Patrick see? What did he think as he saw what was about to happen and happening and happened? I pleaded with the Lord to take into consideration at least the fact that he was good to his sister. That perhaps could make a difference. 27 is a short innings on the map of time and eternity. But then another sort of shock came to me as precisely I was putting up the poem that I'd written under shock about Patrick going into the beyond. It's what came up in the margin on YouTube. As you know, if you look into one thing in search, other things come up related to it. And wow, this is what the Lord obviously meant me to see in that context. And it spoke to me precisely of this gospel I was preparing. It's what happened when this aeroplane was hit not long after takeoff by a bird storm. They pelted the cockpit all in a massive storm of birds like terrible hail and got into the jets, were burnt alive, clogged it and stopped both of them. There was no power in the aeroplane. Now, I wasn't aware they had put this up, but they had put up a very moving, and I say a very moving account, actually minute by minute, of all that happened. And they have there all the evidence and all the relevant eyewitnesses, those involved. And it wasn't just one moment of death imminent in the minds of all, but about 3, because it wasn't so simple. And so we have the reactions of what these poor people in the plane have as they face death. One young man just says, as he sees what's about to happen, what should I do? Should I pray, notice, or should I text or phone? He did actually both. And a few did the same thing with regard to one last message or call to the family to say goodbye, and with emotion, I love you, I love you, I love you. And we have, step by step, exactly what happened. It's extremely moving, I say. Now, I want to make a little parenthesis here before I finish this part. It's this. It's what people don't know so much about that. It's the fact that there was, amongst that 155 people on board, in the passenger area, a pilot off duty. He was sitting over the left engine, and his name was Fred Beretta. He was a Catholic. As it happens, before takeoff, he, I believe, had been given an intuition there was something going to happen. But that's to be parked for the time being. Doesn't matter. This bit does. He was reading a book on divine mercy. He actually closed it, and it was going into precisely 3 o'clock, the hour of mercy, and he was claiming the promises and aware. Eventually, not long after takeoff, close to the wing as he was, pilot as he was, he saw what was happening and what was going to happen. Both engines were not working. All that can be done is manipulate the gliding system, losing altitude all the time. He just read about the promise of the hour of mercy. He went into intense prayer mode and claimed the promise on behalf of all 155 on board. And what happened? We have, in the testimony given by the pilot, all the emotion that he felt initially as he saw what he had to do and what was ahead, very well described. But then we have, actually not on that YouTube itself, but in another interview which he gave, this bit. I felt a huge car come over me from somewhere. That was what made the difference. Because he knew, as an experienced pilot, that the only way he could in any way avoid a massive disaster for the whole civil population underneath, because it was massively populated, was to land where there were no houses. Therefore, on the only possibility he couldn't get to an airport, there wasn't enough airspace to go down to get there, on this river, the Hudson. But he knew that it was to the centimetre, and that the angle had to be about 11 degrees, and there are reasons for that. It's happened before, several splash landings, and it's always the same problem. If it's not exactly that, the aeroplane splits up. And so it was. Now, it doesn't stop at that impact. Because of all that they were trying to do in the meantime to get these motors working again, they had not got to the end of the checklist which would have saved them, because they had to press one switch, which is the ditch one, which would have sealed it against water, because what was happening was the back was taken in water. It was going down and down and down by the second. And the passengers then thought, okay, it's death by drowning. It doesn't stop there, but I'll spare you the details because there was a third emergency afterwards. But what I want to say is this. Through heroic cooperation and intervention of Providence, they were saved by other people possibly sacrificing their lives, plunging into the ice-cold water and going into the airplane to see if there were any left. And the captain was the last to leave the sinking aircraft. But this bit, and you'll see why I'm landing here, they interviewed people. And do you know that each of the 155 people aboard was hugely changed? Why? They realized for the first time what a day of life was. Many changed completely their life. Completely. I just make a little jump. On the map of eternity, whether it's 27 years or 74, as I'm going to mention now, it's only a tiny little smudge in which all is decided. But then it occurred to me how in the monastery, when somebody went into the beyond, it wasn't actually sad. There was a huge joy in the air. It's rather like in the Second World War, where Winston Churchill would go around with the victory sign and galvanize the English people. Ultimate victory. Traditionally, one buries them without a coffin. In they go, earth to earth. One day, we were burying one of the brethren whom we knew to be a saint. He did this. After the Second Vatican Council, because they started to make more lenient the observances, he decided that it was his duty to double them up and to make twice as much penance as before. And so he shortened his life through penance. I used to work with him sometimes, making altar prayers. Father Canis. In the Trappist life, one keeps watch before, during and after, until he's in the ground. And so, all night and all day, we'd go in twos beside the open coffin and say psalm after psalm, the whole psalter, and pass the psalter on to the next group. And it wasn't a sad occasion. One saw peace on his face, and one was aware, homeward bound. He's with the angels, and he's happy. And you know, it almost manifested itself in the mood in the air. It was midnight sometime when this particular group of novices ourselves were there. We were 5 each at the time, kept watch one after the other in twos, and at a certain point, to keep awake, we went into the kitchen to take some Kit Kat and tea and then come back to our vigil. But then I remember going to confession the following weekend to Father Lawrence, who eventually became abbot, and I mentioned that we've been nibbling Kit Kat in the presence of the grave in the chapter house of the body. And it hit me when I heard his response, what Christian joy is. He simply said, you should have offered one to Father Canis.